Greetings, welcome back to Black Bear News, where we are discussing climate change, abrupt climate change, and the possibilities of compassionate degrowth. I was going to cover a whole bunch of things, but then, and maybe I still cover, maybe I'll just quickly kind of skip through some headlines and then move on to the thing I wanted to read, but it's really long. And I have no idea how long it's going to take me to read it, but I want to read this article or this letter to the citizens of the world, leaders and citizens of the world. And this is from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Science and Security Board. So these are the people that run the doomsday clock, have this pretty comprehensive letter talking about why it's still 2 minutes to midnight. And I want to read this because it's good. Quickly, I'm going to just move through some headlines. Bernie Sanders is going to announce his candidacy for 2020. Yay. I'm happy about that. There has been an outbreak of deformed salmon in British Columbia fish farms. This is actually from last year, August 19th, a video about deformed salmon, but watch it. It's very short and very sad. Another headline from Oregon. This is from January 11th, 2019. Oregon begins killing sea lions to protect local fish. Oregon wildlife officials have started killing California sea lions that threaten a fragile and unique type of trout in the Willamette River, a body of water that's miles inland from the coastal areas where the massive carnivorous aquatic mammals usually congregate to feed. The Department of Fish and Wildlife obtained a federal permit in November to kill up to 93 California sea lions annually below Willamette Falls, south of Portland, Oregon, to protect the winter run of the fish that began life as rainbow trout, but become steelhead when they travel to the ocean. Okay. Maybe I'll save this for another day and read more of it, but I just wanted to read that headline. Here's a headline from Truth Out, and many people already know this, but maybe some people need to hear it again. The Democratic Party is further to the right than most voters. So what that's saying basically is that most voters want progressive, more left-leaning ideas, and the Democratic Party won't give it to us. That's what that's saying. The majority of people in the United States want Medicare for all. They want free college. They want debt relief. They want Medicare. They want what else am I thinking of? They want progressive ideals. Those are the main ones. They want to bring the troops home from wars around the world, and this is what the American people want. But the Democrats are like, no. I may actually come back and read some more of these things tomorrow, because I'd like to get a little more in depth in some of these articles. But that's all I'm going to read of those headlines. And I wanted to read a quick comment from where is it? Oh, where did you go? From Fiesta Cranberry. She writes, I don't agree with you on the smoking, Kevin. My analogy yesterday. People seem to have one of two reactions. Either they continue to deny it, like my boyfriend's parents always did when the doctor told them that their smoking was causing him to be sick all the time, or they just don't give a shit, like my sister, who smoked all through her chemo for lung cancer. And the last words I heard her say were, wish I had a cigarette. Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. That's exactly how we're dealing with climate change, pretty much. How most people, they deny, or they just were like, F it. As far as the Rhine goes, I have a friend who paid $20,000 $20,000 for one of those cruises that go up the river. When she got there, they told her that the first part of the cruise would be on a bus because the river was too low. Turned out the entire cruise ended up being by bus on the Autobahn, and she saw nothing. She's now suing them to get her money back. And that is a wild story. And there you go. How is climate change impacting all these, all the touristas all around the world who want to go see all the things? I've actually heard one of my friends went to Asia, I believe it was last year, and it was like monsoon after monsoon after monsoon, and they got totally whacked. In fact, they ended up not going to Asia because they tried flying around and trying to look at things, and the monsoons just obliterated their trip, and they ended up going to like Europe or something. Anyways, let's get to this article from the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists. There's like a forward, there's a statement, there's like a forward to this, but I'm not going to read it. I'm going to just read the letter because it's long. To the leaders and citizens of the world, a new abnormal. It is still 2 minutes to midnight, and this is dated January 24th, 2019. Humanity now faces two simultaneous existential threats, either of which would be cause for extreme concern and immediate attention. These major threats, nuclear weapons and climate change, were exacerbated this past year by the increased use of information warfare to undermine democracy around the world, amplifying risk from these and other threats and putting the future of civilization in extraordinary danger. This is going to get super interesting. In the nuclear realm, the United States abandoned the Iran nuclear deal and announced it would withdraw from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, grave steps toward a complete dismantlement of the global arms control process. Although the United States and North Korea moved away from the bellicose rhetoric of 2017, the urgent North Korean nuclear dilemma remains unsolved. Meanwhile, the world's nuclear nations proceeded with programs of nuclear modernization, and the United States are one of those, that are all but indistinguishable from a worldwide arms race, and the military doctrines of Russia and the United States have increasingly eroded the long-held taboo against the use of nuclear weapons. On the climate change front, global carbon dioxide emissions, which seemed to plateau earlier this decade, resumed an upward climb in 2017 and 2018. To halt the worst effects of climate change, the countries of the world must cut net worldwide carbon dioxide emissions to zero by well before the end of the century. By such a measure, the world community failed dismally last year. At the same time, the main global accord on addressing climate change, the 2015 Paris Agreement, has become increasingly beleaguered. The United States announced it will withdraw from that pact, and as the December Climate Summit in Poland, at the December Climate Summit in Poland, the United States allied itself with Russia, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, all major petroleum producing countries, to undercut an expert report on climate change impacts that the Paris Climate Conference had itself commissioned. Amid these unfortunate nuclear and climate developments, there was a rise during the last year in the intentional corruption of the information ecosystem on which modern civilization depends. This is very important. In many forums, including particularly social media, nationalist leaders and their surrogates lied shamelessly, insisting that their lies were truth and the truth fake news. These intentional attempts to distort reality, exaggerate social divisions, undermine trust in science, and diminish confidence in elections and democratic institutions, because these distortions attack the rational discourse required for solving the complex problems facing humanity. Cyber-enabled information warfare aggravates other major global dangers, including those posed by nuclear weapons and climate change, as it undermines civilization generally. I'm going to add to this. The major mainstream news outlets pump out fake news all the time, and in this last 2 weeks, there were a few fake articles, one of which Robert Mueller said no to the BuzzFeed news article. It continues to happen over and over again over the last 2 years. CNN, Washington Post, New York Times, all these entities put out fake news stories, and that is actually what fuels this whole fake newsism, the whole distrust in the process, in democracy, and institutions, higher institutions, and the government itself. That's what fuels it, because these fuckers keep lying to us. So get that straight, scientists. There's nothing normal about the complex and frightening reality just described. The bulletin of the Atomic Scientists Science and Security Board today sets the doomsday clock at 2 minutes to midnight, the closest it has ever been to apocalypse. Though unchanged from 2018, the setting should be taken not as a sign of stability, but as a stark warning to leaders and citizens around the world. The current international security situation, what we call the new abnormal, has extended over 2 years now. It's a state as worrisome as the most dangerous times of the Cold War, a state that features an unpredictable and shifting landscape of simmering disputes that multiply the chances for major military conflict to erupt. See Venezuela. This new abnormal is simply too volatile and dangerous to accept as a continuing state of world affairs. Dire as the present may seem, there is nothing hopeless or predestined about the future. The bulletin resolutely believes that human beings can manage the dangers posed by the technology that humans create. Indeed, in the 1990s, leaders in the United States and the Soviet Union took bold action that made nuclear war markedly less likely, and that led the bulletin to move the minute hand of the doomsday clock far from midnight. But threats must be acknowledged before they can be effectively confronted. The current situation in which intersecting nuclear, climate, and information warfare threats all go insufficiently recognized and addressed, when they are not simply ignored or denied, is unsustainable. The longer world leaders and citizens carelessly inhabit this new and abnormal reality, the more likely the world is to experience catastrophe of historic proportions. Let's get into it a little more. Worrisome nuclear trends continue. The global nuclear order has been deteriorating for many years, and 2018 was no exception to this trend. Relations between the United States and both Russia and China have grown more fraught. The architecture of nuclear arms control built up over half a century continues to decay, while the process of negotiating reductions in nuclear weapons and fissile material stockpiles is moribund. The nuclear armed states remain committed to their arsenals, are determined to modernize their capabilities, and have increasingly espoused doctrines that envision nuclear use. Brash leaders, intense diplomatic disputes, and regional instabilities combine to create an international context in which nuclear dangers are all too real. A number of negative developments colored the nuclear story in 2018. First, the United States abandoned the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the multilateral agreement that imposed unprecedented constraints on Iran's. So actually, I'm going to stop right here. The first part of this pretty much summed up what they're talking about, and they're just going into more detail about all the things that I talked about. And I will link this below, and you can read for yourself the detail. I don't need to expound on it. I think you all understand what's going on and why they're saying what they're saying. But I am going to read this one part. The threat of information warfare and other disruptive technologies, nuclear war and climate change threaten the physical infrastructure that provides the food, energy, and other necessities required for human life. But to thrive, prosper, and advance, people also need reliable information about their world. That's why this channel exists, and other channels like it. Factual information in abundance. Today, however, chaos reigns in much of the information ecosystem on which modern civilization depends. In many forums of political and societal discourse, we now see national leaders shouting about fake news, by which they mean information they do not like. However, yes, these same leaders lie shamelessly, calling their lies truth. Acting across national boundaries, these leaders and their surrogates exacerbate existing divisions, creating rage and increasing distrust in public and private institutions, using unsupported anecdotes and sketchy rhetoric. Denialists raise fear in doubt regarding well-established science about climate change and other urgent issues. That is true. Established institutions of the government, journalism, and education, institutions that have traditionally provided stability, are under attack precisely because they have provided stability. That's actually not true. In this environment, communication inflames passions rather than informing reason. Many countries have long employed propaganda and lies, otherwise known as information warfare, to advance their interests. But a quantitative change of sufficient magnitude qualifies as a quantitative change. In the internet age, the volume and velocity of information has increased by orders of magnitude. Modern information technology and social media allow users easy connectivity and high degrees of anonymity across national borders. This widespread, inexpensive access to worldwide audiences has allowed practitioners of information warfare to broadcast false and manipulative messages to large populations at low cost, and at the same time to tailor political messages to narrow interest groups. By manipulating the natural cognitive predispositions of human beings, information warriors can exacerbate prejudices, biases, and ideological differences. It can invoke alternative facts to advance political positions based on outright falsehoods rather than a cyber Armageddon. It causes financial meltdown or nationwide electrical blackouts. This is more insidious use of cyber tools to target and exploit human insecurities and vulnerabilities, eroding the trust and cohesion on which civilized societies rely. The Enlightenment sought to establish reason as a foundational pillar of civilized discourse. In this conception, logical argument matters, and the truth of a statement is tested by examination of values, assumptions, and facts, not by how many people believe it. Cyber-enabled information warfare threatens to replace these pillars of logic and truth with fantasy and rage. I agree. If unchecked, such distortion will undermine the world's ability to acknowledge and address urgent threats posed by nuclear weapons and climate change. It will increase the potential for an end to civilization as we know it. The international community should begin multilateral discussions that aim to discourage cyber-enabled information warfare and to buttress institutions dedicated to rational, fact-based discourse and governance. The world faces other major threats from disruptive technologies. Developments in synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, and cyber sabotage are of particular concern. The velocity of change across these and other technological fronts is extremely high. The international efforts to manage these rapid advances has been to date grossly insufficient. A signal event of 2018 was the editing of the human genome in China, an unfortunate demonstration of the weakness of institutional constraints on genetic engineering and other biotechnological research. The advent of designer human beings would constitute a truly history-changing event with a significant potential for unforeseen, large, and dangerous consequences. The international community has a common interest in delaying experimentation into the editing of human genomes until such research can receive the highest level of scientific and ethical review. At the same time, other biological hazards, ranging from biological terrorist attacks to the emergence of deadly, rapidly spreading diseases, continue to threaten world security. The management of synthetic biology and other biothreats must become a world priority. Advances in machine intelligence, often called artificial intelligence or AI, are also progressing at a rapid and largely unmanaged pace. The Science and Security Board is particularly concerned about the incorporation of AI into autonomous weaponry that makes kill decisions without human supervision. But AI research and development cut across a wide array of human activities because AI will have increasingly large military, economic, and social effects. In coming decades, the international community must develop a cooperative system that maximizes the positive potential of advances in machine cognition while diminishing potential downsides. Beyond the information warfare previously described, the sabotaging of computing networks via cyber hacking constitutes a multifaceted threat to global security. The sophisticated sabotage of the Internet of Things, computer networks that control major financial and power infrastructure and have access to more than 20 billion personal devices, could have impacts so severe as to inspire military responses, potentially involving nuclear weapons. Here, too, more effective international management regimes are desperately needed. Wow, heady stuff. There's more to read. This is pretty intensive. You guys get the idea. I'm going to link this below. Thank you, Osama, for linking this. Um, yeah, the social media thing is interesting. I mean, it's not just about um, people believing. There's a big umbrella that all of that covers, and you really have to parse out what they're, the things that they said from what's really going on. But one thing that I do see on social media is a resistance to view situations as complex, because people really need to hang on to their outrage around, keeping a story simple, right? Or an ideal simple, or what's the other word I'm looking for? They also need to hold on to denigrating, you know, targets, people, groups, whoever it is that people are talking about. I mean, the right does it to the left, calls them, insane, the insane leftists and all that, and the left do it to the right. Um, and kind of actually the left is getting really good at kind of sidelining like anybody that they don't like by just calling them racist, sexist, mansplaining, white splaining, blah blah, whatever. You can just smear somebody with something like that and immediately end the conversation or end the discussion or end looking into the complexity of an issue, right? Looking for evidence around and something that happens. People don't want to do that, right? They want to just go with what it is that they're pissed off about or upset about, and just like leave it very, no, we can't have it be complex. We can't have multiple sides of information because screw that, like it's just it's just what we say it is. That's it. It's basically, I don't want any more evidence because I want to be right, and I want you to be wrong, and that's just it. I don't want. And also you're dehumanizing people in that situation, right? Like in on some level you're making people less than, right, morally less than or dehumanized. So it's an interesting kind of like, because oftentimes the left is saying you're dehumanizing us and that's why we're so pissed off, so we're going to it's like this pit of this whirlpool of dehumanization on both sides, and everybody's acting like an ass, which is not helping anybody. So it's like higher consciousness is where you want to go, like you want to act on a plane of higher consciousness, of more information, of more evidence, of more logic, of more thoughtfulness, of more whatever. So that's just my 2 cents on that issue. I'm going to backtrack since that wasn't necessarily as long as that I thought that would take. Excuse me. I'm going to go back to this other article I wanted to read. This is from BBC News. Big rise in atmospheric CO2 expected in 2019. Met Office researchers expect to record one of the biggest rises in atmospheric concentrations of CO2 in 2019. Every year, the Earth's natural carbon sinks, such as forests, soak up large amounts of CO2 produced by human activities. But in years when the tropical Pacific region is warmer, like this year, trees and plants grow less and absorb smaller amounts of gas. As a result, scientists say 2019 will see a much bigger CO2 rise than 2018. This is not good. So we're starting to lose our carbon sinks, and along with the CO2 that we are pumping into the atmosphere at higher levels, our carbon sinks are going to be carbon emitters. Since 1958, the Research Observatory at Mauna Loa in Hawaii has been continuously monitoring and collecting data on the chemical composition of the atmosphere. In years since they first started recording, the observatory has seen a 30% increase in the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere caused by emissions of fossil fuels and deforestation. Scientists argue that the increase would have been even larger without the ability of the forest, land, and seas to soak up around half of the gas emitted by human activities. The ability, however, varies with seasons. Oh, Lord. In the summer of in the summer, CO2 levels in the atmosphere fall as the trees and plants soak up more of the carbon as they grow. In the winter, when they drop their leaves, they soak up less and atmospheric levels rise. But when temperatures are warmer and drier than normal, trees and plants grow less and absorb less. This natural variation is compounded in years when there's an El Nino event, which sees an upwelling of heat from the Pacific into the atmosphere. The warm sea surface conditions now will continue over the next few months, and that will lead into the vegetation response, said Dr. Chris Jones from the Met Office. They are forecasting that average CO2 concentrations in 2019 will be 411 parts per million. Carbon dioxide concentrations exceeded 400 parts per million for the first time in 2013. This year's predicted rise won't be as big as in the El Nino years of 2015 and 16 and 1997 and 98. However, there have only been increases similar to this year about half a dozen times since records began. And considering the last 4 years have been the 4 hottest on record, with an increase, a larger increase in CO2, this can only mean bad things. Going back to this article about killing sea lions. Last winter, a record low 512 wild winter steelhead completed the journey past the Willamette Falls. According to state counts, less than 30 years ago, that number was more than 15,000. From 15,000 to 512. Okay. The sea lions are eating so many winter steelhead at Willamette Falls that certain runs are at a high risk of going extinct. Wildlife officials moved about a dozen sea lions on the coast near the small city of Newport last year, but the animals ended up swimming back to the falls within days. So the state petitioned federal officials for permission to start killing the animals, which are listed as a federally endangered species. Great. In a similar program, Oregon and Washington have already killed more than 150 sea lions below the Bonneville Dam on the Columbia River to protect threatened and endangered salmon. And lastly, I'm going to read this from January 23rd, 2019. Climate change tipping point could be coming sooner than we think, says study. I'm going to read a little bit of this and link it below. Global carbon emissions reached a record high 2018, rising by an estimated 3.4% in the US alone. This trend is making scientists, government officials, and industry leaders more anxious than ever about the future of our planet. As United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said at the opening of the 24th Annual UN Climate Conference on December 3rd, we are in deep trouble with climate change. Columbia Engineering study published today in Nature confirms the urgency to tackle climate change. While it's known that extreme weather events can affect the year-to-year variability in carbon uptake, some researchers have suggested that there may be longer-term effects. This new study is the first to actually quantify the effects through the 21st century and demonstrates that wetter than normal years do not compensate for losses in carbon uptake during drier than normal years caused by events such as droughts or heat waves. Anthropogenic emissions of CO2, emissions caused by human activities, are increasing the concentration of CO2 in the Earth's atmosphere and producing unnatural changes to the planet's climate system. The effects of these emissions on global warming are only being partially abated by the land and ocean. Currently, the ocean and terrestrial biosphere, forests, and savannas are absorbing about 50% of these releases, explaining the bleaching of coral reefs and acidification of the ocean, as well as the increase of carbon storage in our forests. It is unclear, however, whether the land can continue to uptake anthropogenic emissions at the current rates, said Pierre Gentin, Associate professor of Earth and Environmental Engineering and affiliated with the Earth Institute, who led the study. Should the land reach a maximum carbon uptake rate, global warming could accelerate, with important consequences for people and the environment. This means that we all really need to act now to avoid greater consequences of climate change. Bingo. That's what we need to do. I'm all for it. That's all I have for you tonight. Thank you so much for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. If you would like to support this channel, you can do so at the links below. Looking forward to your comments and discussion as well. Until next time, peace.